In this video, I'm going to show you how to use deliberate practice and variations of it to help you get the fastest results in your playing and potentially double your progress in just a single practice session. Now, deliberate practice is what I consider to be a fundamental practice strategy for effective practice. And what I want to do today is explain exactly what it is. I want to show you the exact steps that you need to take to apply it to your music practice. And then I want to show you how you can use the principles of deliberate practice when you're practicing alone. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Diego Alonso, and I've been a professional classical and flamenco guitarist and teacher for over 20 years. But when I started, my journey was really rocky. It was way more challenging than it should have been, frankly, because I just didn't know how to practice the right way. So I went to graduate school to try to find solutions. And after finishing a master's thesis on expert practice strategies, I learned tons of amazing tools that have helped me make significantly faster progress in the practice room and avoid more serious setbacks. So what I want to do in this video is show you how to use one of those tools, which is deliberate practice, to help you also be more efficient in practice and hopefully avoid a lot of the same mistakes that I used to make. First, let's take a look at a very common mistake that I see most beginner and intermediate students make, which is that when they're practicing and they make a mistake, instead of stopping right away to fix it, they try to correct the mistake by starting over from the very beginning of the line or whatever musical phrase that they're playing, with the intention of not making the same mistake again when they reach that same part. But if we stop to think about that for a second, that strategy would be really similar to, I don't know, maybe like writing a research paper, making a typo, and then instead of correcting the typo on the spot, rewriting the whole paper from the beginning, word for word, hoping that when you get to the typo spot, you don't make the same mistake. Obviously, that's totally ridiculous, and none of us would ever do that. But when it comes to music practice, I think a lot of us fall into this exact practice method because we feel like repetitions alone are going to help us improve. But when we think of mistakes in practice, like the typo analogy, I think it becomes pretty clear that this approach doesn't really help us get better. It ends up being pretty much a waste of time and can quickly result in plateaus and regressions. A much better way to improve faster is to be extremely strategic in your practice and use deliberate practice or variations of it to improve. Deliberate practice was a concept that was introduced by expertise researcher K. Anders Ericsson in 1983. He had a paper that was titled "The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance." If I remember that correctly, it'll be up on the screen. And in that paper, Ericsson and his colleagues described deliberate practice as a highly structured and effortful way of practicing that involves several things. It involves goal setting, strategic problem solving, immediate feedback, and strategic repetitions that are all designed to improve the weaknesses in our playing. Now, what Ericsson and his colleagues found in the research was that the top performers in all fields that they studied used deliberate practice as a foundational strategy to reach the highest levels of expertise. Now, I am going to be honest, deliberate practice, I use it all the time. It is not inherently enjoyable, but it is absolutely crucial if you want to make significant progress in your playing in less time than it would normally take if you did not use deliberate practice. So yes, it's definitely hard work. So I want to share two tips that I found very helpful that can help you add more enjoyment in the process. And the first thing I think is to celebrate the fact that you've made improvements and that you've worked hard. Remind yourself that the work that you've done in your deliberate practice or your strategic practice session is really helping you improve overall. And the second thing that really helps me is to end all of my practice sessions by running through music and focusing on enjoying the process and being expressive. It doesn't necessarily even have to be the music that you've worked on in your more, strategic or deliberate session. It could be any piece of music that you find enjoyable. If it happens to be the same piece of music that you've worked on strategically, that's fine. But the goal should really be to enjoy it and to be expressive. And then I think you'll find a lot of gratification in that process. Let's quickly walk through the steps of deliberate practice, and I'll demonstrate them a little bit later, but for now I just want to walk through the steps so that you can understand what is involved. The first step is that when you're practicing a piece, you want to stop immediately and identify the mistake, right? What exactly happened, and then figure out what kind of mistake it was. So was it rhythmic? Was it mechanical? Was it expressive, right? Step one is the identification step. Step two, once you've identified the mistake, you want to analyze the mistake and figure out exactly what caused the mistake. So you don't want to just say, I made a mistake, or for example, let's say you missed a note. You don't just want to say, I missed a note. You want to say, I missed a note because maybe my elbow was too high, so that brought my third finger down. Obviously, that made me miss the note. And then you want to propose a solution in this analysis step. And the solution is obvious. Bring the elbow in so that the third finger can hover above the note, right? So again, step one, identification. Step two is the analysis, where we figure out what happened and why. and then propose a hypothesis or a solution. Step 3 is the natural progression of that, which is going to be to implement your solution, but you want to do that implementation in isolation. That means you don't want to go back to the very beginning of the phrase. Like I mentioned, that's one of the biggest problems that we see for beginners and intermediate students. You want to go just back a few notes before the problem happened and up to and including the challenge, right? So again, implementing the solution only a few notes back, up to and including the challenge. Step 4, after you've implemented your solution, you want to get feedback. Now, obviously, if we're playing, your ears are feedback, your eyes are feedback, your hands are feedback. We can give ourselves auto feedback, right? You can also get feedback from an external source like a coach or a teacher. Now, there is one important point I want to make, and Erickson makes it very clear. Erickson, he's the author of the deliberate practice paper that I mentioned earlier. He makes it very clear that for the fastest results and most secure improvement, feedback should really come from an external source, which should be an expert like a coach or a teacher in whatever field you're working on, right? We're going to talk about what that means in a minute, but for now, just know that immediate feedback is an essential component of the deliberate practice steps. Step 5 is then to decide what to do next, right? After you've given yourself feedback, you've applied your solution once, now you decide if it went well and if you want to continue that and repeat it correctly several times, or if it didn't go well, you may need to either come up with a new solution or make adjustments to the current solution that you have, right? This is the repetition section where you can introduce strategic practice or strategic repetition strategies to help you improve faster. And I did make a couple videos on that, which I will have linked in the description below, so make sure to check that out. So I mentioned earlier that deliberate practice technically requires external feedback from an expert, like a coach or teacher, so that we can improve faster. But obviously, most of our guitar practice is done alone, right? We're usually practicing in a room like this in isolation. So the question is, can you apply deliberate practice effectively? Well, yes, kind of. We can still apply the same core principles of deliberate practice even without a coach or teacher, but without external feedback, we're technically engaged in what I like to call strategic practice. This is just, it's a semantic kind of thing, but really it's just deliberate practice without a coach, right? We're giving ourselves feedback. So this means that if we want to do it correctly and get the most out of our practice by using these steps, we need to be much more mindful in our practice and much more, I think, honest and objective and detailed about our feedback to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. Now, for clarity, I want to show you exactly how I use these steps in my own practice. So I'm going to grab my guitar and I'm just going to go through a really simple scalar phrase. I'm not going to play any whole piece of music or anything. Just a quick example, a quick demonstration of how you can apply these steps, right? So let's say I'm playing this passage, right? And I missed the note. I'm obviously forcing the error right now, but let's say it happened by accident. I want to stop right away. Even if the phrase continued, I'm not going to go any further. As soon as I make the mistake, personally, I like to hold my position, hold the mistake position so I can see what's going on. So I identify what kind of mistake it was. It was a mechanical mistake. Step 2 is to analyze it, right? I'm going to figure out exactly why the mistake happened. In this case, it could be because my elbow was too far out to the left, which dropped my pinky a little bit more. And then obviously the solution is going to be to do the exact opposite, right? So bring my elbow in. So next step, I'm going to implement my solution. But remember, I want to do that in isolation. So I'm not going to go back to the beginning of the phrase and start. No, I'm going to back up just a couple notes, maybe even one note. Elbow in, so it wasn't out here, now it's here. Okay, right, that works. And I give myself feedback, right? That's the next step. Obviously, the feedback is pretty automatic. You can see if it's working or hear if it's working or not, right? And then the 5th step is to make a decision, right? I want to make a decision whether or not to repeat the same correction or make an adjustment or find a new solution if necessary. Now, one quick note. All of this happens very quickly, right, when you're working on this stuff, but this is how you want to do it. So I've given myself feedback, the correction works. Now I want to start to apply it to a larger phrase. It works, and little by little I continue to do that, repeat positive repetitions, continue to engage in positive repetitions until that starts to feel much more natural, and then I can progressively increase the tempo to my goal. All right, I hope that helps you understand it. Again, it's a very quick process. I know talking about it takes longer, but doing it is a very quick process. You just have to be very mindful when you do it. Now, there's one important thing I want to note. After I've addressed one single challenge, I'm going to do the same thing for the next challenge and for the next and so forth until I end up with a nice small set of challenges. And then what I'm going to do is implement interleaved practice so that I work on each challenge in sets. So if I have, for example, challenge A, B, and C, I'm going to go back the second time directly to the challenge. I'm not going to go back to the top of the phrase and play the stuff that I can already play well. I'm going to go right to the weaknesses, right, the weak points, and focus on those. So I might do A again several times to get it right, to reinforce the correct solutions, B several times, C several times, take a break, and then do maybe a third set, maybe even a fourth set, right? You don't want to do too many sets, you don't want to hurt yourself, but usually for me, I like to do right around 3, maybe 4 sets max. So using interleaved practice is really going to be extremely beneficial when you're working on any challenges or any piece of music. Now, there is another variation of deliberate practice where you can incorporate external feedback in your practice sessions to help you improve faster, which is what I do in every single practice session. And this is where a recording device comes in and can make all the difference in the world. So I use my phone, and I use a little microphone that I've got here. Actually, let me show you this microphone real quick. This is just permanently on my desk. This is the Audigo microphone. They're not sponsoring this, by the way, at all. I just bought this and it's absolutely amazing. It's a little wireless condenser microphone. They have a free app and a paid app that you can use on your phone. And it gives me a higher quality of sound so I can really hear all the details when I listen back. If you are interested in getting that Audigo mic, I'll have a link in the description below. It is an affiliate link, so they give me a small commission, which I use to support all the free content that I put out there. But you can use any mic you want. It doesn't really matter. The point is that recording yourself is basically like having a coach in the room, except you're your own coach, right? And so it's up to you to give yourself objective feedback on your playing. Now, this can be a hard thing to do. It can be hard, especially if you're a beginner, intermediate student. It can be hard to hear yourself or even see yourself. Sometimes we get judgmental, right? I want to urge you to please do your best not to be judgmental, and remember that no piece of music ever sounds good when we're learning it or in the early development process. It starts to sound good as we improve spots. So please don't be judgmental if you hear you recording yourself, and try not to say, oh man, I suck. Instead, try to pinpoint exactly what went wrong, and we'll talk about how I do that in a second. Another thing is that your recordings don't have to be video recordings. I personally like to start with audio recordings, and then I usually switch to video recordings because I like to engage my ears a lot more. But they can be audio recordings. You don't have to see yourself play. Now, here's a helpful tip that I found really useful when I started implementing this idea, and that is to treat every single recording as if you were listening to one of your closest friends play, and you really want to help your friend improve his or her playing by giving your friend very constructive and very honest feedback. Here's how I do it. The first thing that I'm going to do, and that I would recommend you always do, is to select a very short phrase that you've either been working on, or maybe you've just learned it and you've memorized it. The short phrase can be, it can be 1 measure, it can be 4 measures. It should be a line of music that makes sense musically, meaning it should have a beginning and an end. You should be able to hear when the phrase ends. Then I'm going to have my phone set up, and I've got my little Audigo mic set up. I hit record and I play my short phrase. And the third step is I obviously hit stop and then listen back immediately. Now, when I listen back, I'm looking for specific errors. Any error that comes up, I want to hit pause and figure out what it's like. It could be a wrong note, it could be a misshift, a rhythmic thing, it could be expressive. It doesn't matter. Remember, you want to implement those same steps that we talked about earlier, so figure out what kind of mistake it was. But the point is, hit pause as soon as you hear a mistake, okay? And then you want to work on it using the same steps that we talked about in deliberate practice to isolate and fix those errors. Then you do the same thing for all the errors in the recording. And then, like I mentioned earlier, you want to use interleaved practice to work on all of them in sets. Now, when I start, this is important to note, and I think it'll be helpful to you too. When I start each subsequent set, I'll record myself playing each of my challenges with my solutions again, and then I'll go through all the steps of deliberate practice again. So every step is the same thing repeated, so that I can constantly get external feedback every time I address a challenge. And I find that really helps me improve much more, and it really keeps me aware and mindful of what I'm doing. So one thing I think that makes a recording device more effective is that it allows us to catch a lot of the errors that we likely miss when we don't use a recording device. And I'm telling you, we will miss a lot. When we're playing, I think we're really good at catching the big mistakes, like the wrong notes and obviously the misshifts, timing issues. But some things are not really that perceivable. So the recording device, it's basically like practicing under a microscope, right? And to be honest, this really is more cognitive work It requires us to be more thoughtful. It requires a much more thoughtful practice process. It requires us, I think, to be maybe significantly more focused and mindful of all the steps we're taking to improve each challenge. But I'm telling you, please do it. It is totally worth it if you want to improve quickly. Remember, it's work, and anything that I think, any goals that are important for us, they're probably going to require extra work for us to reach those goals and be happy with that. For me personally, I find that having a recording device helps me be much more efficient in practice, and as a result, I tend to see my improvements occur much sooner than I would otherwise. So even though ideally I think we would love to have a coach in the room when we practice that can give us feedback, which would boost our progress and so forth and so on, but in the absence of that, we can really use a recording device and still see major gains in our playing. So give it a shot. And by the way, if you are looking for a more personalized guidance, I recently created a masterclass and coaching program called Spanish Guitar Mastery that is designed specifically around deliberate practice and a lot of other practice strategies that I will mention and have mentioned in other videos. So if you want to fast track your progress, check that out. I'll have a link to that in the description below. You can check it out, and you can even book a call with me so we can see if the program is the right fit for you. Now, there is one important thing to note about deliberate practice, which is that on its own, yes, it's definitely an amazing tool that we should absolutely use to improve quickly. But when we combine deliberate practice with those other evidence-based strategies that I mentioned, we can take our progress to an even higher level. So if you want to do that, make sure to check out the next video on the screen on a learning strategy called spaced practice, where I break down exactly how you can use strategic breaks during and after your practice to help you prevent injuries and also significantly accelerate your learning and long-term retention of your music. Okay? Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.